Like any other, our main guy was transported to another world, and was reborn as nothing more than an iron-skinned pupa. Luckily, he got some compensation for this bullshit through an OP skill, a devouring skill that let him copy abilities and evolve from it. And it all started at a school. Our MC named Chin Young was running towards someone cause you see, he got some agenda going on. He had a habit of challenging the most popular girl in school, and he was not shy about it too. Cause this wasn't the first time this happened, or even the 20th. Bro was obsessed, as he had challenged this girl for 99 times to be exact. And I don't know about you, but he should be on a restraining order by now. But luckily enough, Chenmo wasn't weirded out. She respected the hustle. So she kept on accepting while beating the shit out of this dude all around. From sports, academics, or even the arts, she always came on top. But he was still challenging her, but since this was about to be the 100th time already, Chenmo asked why was he this persistent. And of course this dumbass had a dumb answer. And that he never believes anyone could be perfect and wanted to challenge that, to prove to everyone that even she couldn't be flawless. And since this was already the 100th time, he added that if he lost to her again, he'd fulfill any wish of hers. And I don't know how, but my boy actually had her blushing. And she was almost caught lacking too, as she blurts out what she wanted if she won, and that she wanted him to be her man. But bro was dense as a rock and also deaf like one, as he didn't peep that and was just too focused in his preparations. He was on a mission, which made her want him even more. With this, she just wanted this to get over with and win. But got to hand it to bro, he was on some next level coping, since he still believes he can win this against a genius just because he works hard, not realizing that maybe the genius also works hard. And so when match started, he started blitzing, and he got that head start, which made him very hopeful. But Chenmo just appeared in front in an instant and win that shit, breaking his hopes and dream, a price she was willing to sacrifice. For him to be hers, she wasn't going to pass up an opportunity to get her man. She is that aggressive. And she immediately approached him too to collect the end of the deal. But my boy was determined for all the wrong reasons, and challenged her yet again, which made her really consider. But fate wasn't going to let bro fumble like that, so it intervened in the most ridiculous way, making a large sinkhole that devours all the students present. No one was safe, and the hole was deep, as they continued to fall for like a minute. The next thing Chin Young knew was he was just floating in the abyss on his spawn attire. But before he could make sense of things, a woman started talking to him, relieved to have him finally wake up. She was the god of dimensions, a being responsible for the realms beyond his understanding. But to put it simply, the reason she is meeting her now was because he is dead. In fact, all of his classmates had the same fate as well. But she had taken pity on them, so she grants them another chance at life in an alternate world. While his peers had already been reborn, Chin Young's unique circumstances placed him in an extraordinary position. But just by the thought of him challenging Chenmo again, determined him right then and there. But he wasn't satisfied with merely existing in this new life. No, he resolved to become the strongest. So he asked for the strongest ability, which made the god hesitate, ready to warn him of the potential dangers. But our boy didn't care about none of that, as he just wanted power, which made the god smile, as this would be an interesting one, while Chin Young is already daydreaming about the time he would defeat Chenmo, and prove to everyone that hard work can conquer everything. With a simple command, the dimensional god sent Chin Young spiraling through the multiverse. His body hurtled through time and space until he landed with a jarring thud. As the dust settled, Chin Young opened his eyes, or at least, he thought he did, only to realize he had been reincarnated as an iron-skinned pupa. Now he was starting to regret his decisions, but lucky for him, this form came with some form of compensation. Though his form was now tiny and immobile, he possessed the ultimate merging system, a power with limitless growth potential. This ability allowed him to consume anything in his path to grow stronger, with the promise of regaining his human form once he reached a certain threshold. With this, he calmed down and was determined not to let his new form define him. Chin Young began to strategize. However, his optimism quickly waned when he realized the extent of his predicament. Not only was he stuck as a pupa, but he was also trapped in a deep hole, entirely helpless without arms or legs to aid his escape. The stillness of his surroundings only added to the tension. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie silence that felt unnatural. But out of nowhere, a rustling in the bushes shattered the quiet. A group of rabbits emerged, their appearance initially comforting. But as they moved closer, their unnerving grins and jagged teeth revealed their true nature. These were no ordinary rabbits, they are more like skinwalkers. But even before Chin Young could fully comprehend the threat, the creatures lunged into the hole. The moment danger struck, the tiny pupa's instincts took over. And little Pupa didn't have those six-pack abs for nothing, and he also drew the memory of his grueling gym days. So he managed to summon enough strength to propel himself out of harm's way. With an explosive effort, the Pupa escaped the hole, bouncing and spinning frantically like a football player until it reached the relative safety of the forest. For a brief moment, the sense of freedom was exhilarating. The forest air brushed against its shell, and the sun warmed its tiny form as it raced ahead. But the joy was short-lived. It soon became clear that it couldn't stop moving, its momentum carrying it further into the unknown. But this welcoming party couldn't get any worse, as it spawned another monster. It was a massive winged serpent that descended from the sky. Fortunately, its aim was trash, and so Chin Young continued spinning. But he just unknowingly propelled into a murky swamp, with a mutated crocodile that was ready to eat him up. But he avoids that too, and continued propelling out of control. Fortunately, a tree nearby stopped him, but due to the impact, he was now lodged in, which made it easy for the skinwalkers to catch up. So now the Pupa was sweating because he knows he can't propel himself like before. And these bunnies wouldn't even give him a second to negotiate, as they leaped in for the kill. But it turns out, Pupa was a whole different monster than them, completely devouring the bunny in one go. Buddy was a predator. Instantly, its buddies clocked out faster than they arrived, finally leaving the Pupa alone. But with that said, his devouring system just proved its worth, as Pupa had acquired a new ability, the power to hop. With this, he could freely hop off the tree, but now that he thinks of it, he couldn't even feel the bunny was in his stomach at all. Thankfully, the system briefs him on why that is, and it seems like his mouth is connected to another space, meaning he could eat whenever he wanted and whatever he could, given that he could fit it in his mouth, and once fully digested, he could gain their abilities. With this in mind, Bro started to smile deviously, thinking of the possibilities, and the monsters here was already feeling the pressure. Look at their face, they were already tweaking. They weren't ready to be the victim. But it didn't take long for them to realize. This Pupa doesn't have stretchable jaws like that, so he failed devouring anything that was bigger than him. From the two-headed snake, to the four-armed bear and even a blade-backed boar, which made him question why. Thankfully, the system chimed in, reminding the Pupa of an important rule, and that it could only devour creatures weaker than itself or those already defeated. But even before it could process the information, the four-armed bear appeared before him, panting like crazy. It wasn't pleased about the stunt the Pupa made earlier, so it started chasing him. And since the Pupa doesn't have legs, he knew it was only a matter of time before the bear catches him. So he had no choice but to hop through the nearest cave he could find. Thankfully, the attempt was a success and he completely got away from the bear. But he was now falling down this massive cave. Fortunately, his small frame made it easier for him to crash without any lethal injuries. But that's when he noticed something unusual. The ground beneath him was warm, almost uncomfortably so. Curiosity got the better of him, and he cautiously peered around the dimly lit cave. His eyes widened as he spotted a chained Kirin standing in the shadows. Its fiery gaze radiated both anger and power. And his instincts told him to leave, and so he began hopping toward the exit. But before he could make it out, the Kirin's voice cut through the silence, commanding him to stop. And startled by the sudden authority in its tone, the Pupa turned back, his tiny eyes narrowing as suspicion started to grow with every word the majestic creature spoke. The Kirin claimed fate had brought them together, and it promised an unimaginable fortune if the Pupa would just listen to what it had to say. But the Pupa wasn't buying it, and he eyed the Kirin warily, convinced this might just be some elaborate trick. And sensing his doubt, the Kirin didn't hesitate, declaring its integrity as a legendary beast. It had no reason to lie to someone as insignificant as a Pupa. And this made the Pupa pause for a moment, though his suspicion didn't completely fade. But then, the Kirin shared something that made him stop in his tracks. A secret about a hidden treasure, one that lay in a room just behind them. And even though the Pupa still wasn't sure if this was some kind of trap, curiosity got the better of him, and so he ventured deeper into the cave. And sure enough, there it was. A glowing crystal ball sitting in the center of a secret chamber, pulsating with energy so bright it made the entire room shimmer. The Kirin urged him to devour it, saying it would dramatically boost his strength, and the promise of power was too tempting to ignore. The Pupa didn't even stop to think twice. He lunged forward and swallowed the crystal ball whole. But far away, at the Spirit Beast Gate, things were going completely haywire. The shattering of a crystal ball there unleashed a surge of energy so strong it felt like a massive explosion had just gone off. And in the middle of all this chaos, a young girl who had been sitting nearby was hit hard by the backlash. Overwhelmed by the force of it, she coughed up blood as pain racked her body, and the energy spread through her uncontrollably. Immediately the elder come to her aid to check on her, as she was their so-called queen. But her condition was nothing compared to why the ball had cracked, and that the beast trap altar had been breached. And that wasn't just any bad news. Hearing that the Kirin had escaped was enough to get them tweaking. Everyone knew a beast like that on the loose meant trouble, the kind that would leave nothing but chaos in its wake. But even so, the queen believed it was just another uncontracted beast, and so they shouldn't be this afraid. And as the queen, she wasn't about to stand around shaking in her boots. Especially when she caught the Kirin once, she believed she could do it again. With this, she got to her feet and ordered the elders to stop cowering and follow her to the altar. But not everyone was buying it. From the sidelines, the white-haired woman just stood there with this sly smile, like she already knew none of them were getting out alive. A few moments later, the group was bolting into the forest, barely taking a breath. But before they could get too far, a dagger came flying out of nowhere, slicing through the air like a warning shot. One of the elders threw himself forward, blocking it just in time, and called out for the perpetrator to show themselves. But whoever it was didn't answer, which only made things worse. And then, a mother-freaking white tiger stepped out of nowhere and just ended the dude right then and there. He didn't even have time to scream. And just when things couldn't seem to get worse, a woman strolled out of the darkness and started dissing the spirit beast gate, calling them weak and useless. And just to make sure they got the message, she snapped her fingers, sending the tiger lunging at them again. But one of the elders wasn't about to roll over. He sensed the strange energy around her, realized she was a real threat, and called up his own contract beast, a silver wolf that let out a howl loud enough to shake the trees. After that, he told everyone to leave, making it clear he'd already decided to stay behind. And they didn't even hesitate. When they finally made it to the cave, they quickly noticed the suffocating aura hanging thick in the air. It was clear the seal was dangerously close to breaking. But before anyone could so much as say a word, the girl leading the charge marched straight inside. The weird energy didn't slow her down at all. Meanwhile, inside the said cave, the pupa was still trying to chomp off the crystal ball, but thankfully, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and so he stepped back first and rethink his situation. Why would the Kirin let him devour something so valuable? And of course, it didn't take long for the realization to hit him. The crystal ball wasn't just some shiny treasure. It was the seal keeping the Kirin trapped. And this revelation sent a chill down his tiny spine. But it also gave him an idea, a really bold one. And so, wasting no time, Pupa turned to the system with an urgent question. Could he devour creatures stronger than him if they were defenseless? To his surprise, the system answered yes. And with that confirmation, he launched himself at the majestic beast, sinking his little jaws right into its shimmering scales. At first, the Kirin didn't even take him seriously, glaring at him like he was some annoying bug. But then its expression shifted, and panic flickered in its eyes as the pupa's devouring skill kicked into high gear. The beast roared in agony as its powerful form started to break apart piece by piece under the relentless attack. But just as the pupa was ready to celebrate his ultimate triumph, the system chimed in with some seriously bad news. The Kirin was way too powerful to be digested, and this sent him into a full-blown tantrum, flailing around the cave like a whirlwind of frustration. But then again, a bright idea had come to mind. Maybe exercise could speed things up. And so, he bolted across the cave at top speed, running in circles until he collapsed, panting and gasping for air. The system, unfazed by the spectacle, calmly explained that digestion wasn't about running around. It required consuming other creatures, equipment, or treasures to break the Kirin's energy down, and this only made the pupa grumble louder, cursing the system for not warning him earlier. But the system was a smart ass, and just reasoned out that he never asked, fueling his anger even more. But before he could even argue further, his tiny body began to levitate, glowing as the Kirin's residual energy coursed through him. He could feel the mystical power surging, and so he readied himself to transform, but he was yanked toward the cave entrance instead. This was done by none other than the queen herself. She was initiating a contract with the Kirin. So when they saw a monster flying towards them at top speed, they thought the ritual was a success. And they are finally getting closer to recapture the majestic beast. And as the monster got in contact with them, aura burst through the cave. It was so intense and flashy that it made them even more excited. This was definitely the Kirin's aura. But as the dust settled and the glowing runes faded, their excitement quickly turned to confusion. Because instead of the mighty Kirin standing in the binding circle, there was just a tiny, bewildered pupa floating mid-air. As the pupa tried to wrap its tiny head around the chaos unraveling in the cave, the system answered him, and that a contract had been signed. And to the pupa's absolute horror, it was now bound as the queen's exclusive spirit creature. Immediately, the pupa wasted no time protesting. It squirmed and wriggled, flailing its little limbs in defiance, clearly unwilling to accept this role. But in the middle of its tiny tantrum, he got to look at the woman's face a little closer, and felt eerily familiar with it, as she looked just like Chenmo, and distracted by this resemblance. The pupa didn't notice when the queen snatched it up, holding it upside down with a look that screamed disdain. This is when the pupa retracts his assumptions, as Chenmo wouldn't be this ruthless. But before anyone could figure out what to do next, the queen suddenly coughed up blood and crumpled to the ground, her body trembling as she fell to one knee. One elder immediately moved to help her, but another stopped him, his eyes glued to the pupa with nothing but disgust. He muttered about how pathetic the queen's choice of a spirit creature was, like this whole thing was her fault. She was no longer of use to the spirit beast gate, declaring she should be replaced. They demanded she hand over all her equipment and treasures right then and there. And though the girl clearly didn't want to, she was weakened and couldn't do anything to resist. So the two had stolen the artifact and dipped the fuck out of there, as they fear that the witch will catch up to them soon. Meanwhile, the pupa watched in growing horror. This was bad, really bad. And so, while everyone was distracted, it figured now was its chance to get out of this mess. It cautiously began backing away from the cave, inching toward freedom. But just when it thought it was in the clear, the system popped up once more, to inform him of his stupidity. Since he is now an exclusive spirit beast by the queen, his master could summon him at will, and if the owner died, he would die too, putting him in a tight spot. But before the pupa could decide on what to do, chaos erupted. The freaking tiger burst out of nowhere yet again, and started tearing through everything in sight. The elders scattered, screaming, while the tiger caused absolute mayhem. And amid the chaos, the pupa got trampled like some unfortunate bug underfoot. Its tiny cries of protest were lost in the commotion until the witch finally noticed it. She picked up the pupa and inspected closely to only catch her by surprise, as she just noticed this little guy had a contract mark, and this was odd. So she quickly turned to the queen and asked where was the Kieran that she was planning to bond with. No wonder those scumbag left her to die. She actually contracted with a trash beast, but even though the girl was battered and bruised, she wasn't about to let this slide. Summoning what little strength she had left, she challenged the woman to a duel. But she got whipped instead, with no way of countering it. She was really pissed by the queen's audacity, so she plans to end her for good. But Qin Yong couldn't have that, as he would die as well, and so he threw himself in front of the girl, trying to shield her. But no matter how hard they tried, it wasn't enough. Moments later, the girl collapsed, her body motionless, her breath gone. The scene turned grimmer as the tiger's owner rewarded her beast with the remains of the carnage. But just when it seemed all hope was lost, a bright light flashed through the cave, blinding the pupa. And in the center of that light, a shadowy figure began to take shape. The figure revealed itself as Chenmo's soul, radiating an ethereal glow. This could be like what the goddess have said earlier. And just as he had assumed, the soul merged with the young girl's lifeless body. The reincarnation was complete. Meanwhile, the white tiger approached and was about to feast on the woman. But Chenmo said, "Cut that shit down," sending the beast flying a few meters through the air, and crashed in front of the witch. The sheer force of it left everyone completely stunned. How could the queen have this power when she was gravely weakened a second ago? Meanwhile, Qin Yong was losing it. He wasn't mistaken, she was definitely Chenmo. With this, he started bouncing wildly in Chenmo's hand, squealing and shouting her name, hugging her as tightly as a little squishy bug could manage, while he squealed out its identity, proudly announcing that it was none other than Qin Yong. But Chenmo just stood there, holding the absurdly large pupa in her hands, her face a perfect mix of confusion and disbelief. How could this possibly be her beloved Qin Yong? But suddenly, the pupa kept talking about how happy it was to see her again, and that made her blush. Still, she couldn't help but feel skeptical about the whole situation. There was no way this could be real. A dream? Maybe. A bizarre joke? Definitely possible. But before she could even try to figure it out, the bad bitch decided to snap out of her shock and charge. Her weapon sliced through the air with terrifying precision. But she easily blocked the attack with her pupa, leaving the witch visibly baffled. It was clear that the queen had somehow regained her strength, and the witch couldn't help but wonder how it was possible. Meanwhile, the pupa, still dangling upside down in Chenmo's grasp, couldn't help but feel just a little dizzy from being held like that for so long. But with the witch visibly confused, he took the opportunity to explain their situation to Chenmo, making it clear that the witch in front of them was trying to kill them, all because Chenmo was some significant figure in a guild or clan. And even though nothing about this felt real, Chenmo couldn't ignore the weight of the situation. Meanwhile, the tiger finally shook itself off, its legs steadying as it regained its balance, and so the witch activated her abilities, sending blazing lightning crackling through the air and straight into the tiger. The beast roared as the energy surged around its body, lighting up the cave like a storm. Empowered by the electrifying boost, the tiger launched itself at Chenmo, each step leaving craters in the ground as bolts of lightning tore through the earth behind it. While Chenmo, clutching the tiny pupa close to her chest, moved with effortless grace, her steps swift and precise as she dodged the oncoming attack. And while Chenmo handled the chaos like a pro, the tiny pupa was feeling increasingly useless. He silently turned to the system, desperately asking if there was anything at all, that he could do to help. And for once, the system had good news, an ability called armor fusion. The pupa could transform into protective armor for his owner. But before he could fully process what that meant, the white tiger's attacks closed in fast, and without hesitation, the pupa once again threw itself in front of Chenmo, taking the full brunt of the blast. But the tiger wasn't done yet. It doubled down with another one. This time a much more concentrated shot aimed directly at her head. It was so fast that Chenmo couldn't dodge it in time. And with that, the attack connected, and the sheer force of it illuminated the entire cave, a testament to its devastating power. Even the witch could feel the crackling electricity's backlash from where she stood. With this, she felt confident. There was no way Chenmo could have survived that. But as the dust began to settle, a figure emerged from the chaos. The witch's confidence wavered as she saw the attack, frozen in place, suspended by an outstretched arm, and that arm belonged to none other than Chenmo herself. This was the pupa's new form, encasing her entire arm in a sleek, powerful armor. And despite its appearance, it felt astonishingly light, as if it had become a natural extension of her body. This meant only one thing. Her strength had reached a whole new level because of it. But the woman wasn't fazed. Instead, she doubled down, urging her tiger to strike again, its lightning-charged body blazing brighter than ever. And with that, the battle exploded into a fierce clash, the tiger's electrified fury meeting Chenmo's precise, calculated moves. Each exchange was like a deadly dance, the two sides trading blow for blow, the air thick with sparks and energy. But even with the tiger's raw power, Chenmo's skill was on another level. Spotting an opening, she surged forward and delivered a devastating punch straight to the tiger's midsection. The impact was so powerful it shattered the beast's spine, sending it flying through the air like a broken doll. With the tiger's connection to its master severed, the woman stumbled back, coughing up blood as the bond's recoil tore through her. Her wide eyes darted between Chenmo and the limp form of her spirit creature, disbelief written all over her face. And as Chenmo advanced with an aura that screamed command, the woman tried to summon her strength. But instead of fighting back, she hurled a flashbang grenade, and when the dust finally settled, she was gone. As silence fell over the cave, the pupa reverted to his tiny, squishy form, his frustration bubbling over, wondering how the witch managed to escape, while Chenmo just watched him, clearly curious about what was going on. She finally asked him outright, and Qin admitted it. He really was the same guy she had known before, and he was sure she'd met the dimensional god before coming here. And as it turned out, he was right. Chenmo recalled a woman who had claimed to be a god, and how she'd wished to be reunited with Qin. It seemed that wish had actually been granted. With this, a relieved smile crossed her face as she realized she hadn't been imagining things after all. And to make it even clearer, the pupa suddenly shifted its demeanor and promised that even with its tiny frame now it would devour countless monsters and surpass her one day. Which made Chenmo laugh, as this was indeed the Qin she fell for. And so she hugged him tightly, even though he is a mere pupa. She was contented to be with him. This is equivalent to girls asking if the guy would still love them if they become a worm. But she just proved that she still indeed loved her man. But the pupa was just squirming in protest as he couldn't breathe with all that cushion in front of her. But their lighthearted moment didn't last long, as Chenmo suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood and collapsed to the ground. Alarm shot through the tiny pupa, and he quickly realized that her injuries from the earlier fight had taken their toll. Just as panic threatened to take over, the system interrupted with a timely reminder, informing him that devouring the white tiger's corpse could grant him a new ability. So without hesitation, the pupa hopped over to the fallen beast and began consuming it, his determination unwavering. As the tiger's energy flowed into him, the pupa felt his stats surge and unlocked a new skill, the white tiger blood energy, a power capable of accelerating healing. Excitement bubbled within him as he scratched his head, trying to figure out how to use the ability to help Chenmo recover. But just as he was about to ask the system for guidance, he noticed something strange. It almost seemed like the system was flustered. The system hesitated before revealing that the skill could only be applied directly to him. If he wanted to transfer its effects to someone else, they would need to come into contact with his saliva or blood. The pupa froze for a moment, disbelief washing over him, but there was no time to argue about the less than ideal method. And so he informs Chenmo first, and suddenly took his tongue out and started licking her intensely. And you know, I won't even say anything weird, 'cause this shit is weird already. This is definitely a fetish by someone. Healing by licking? Yeah, right. Awkward as it was, the process actually worked. The healing energy spread through her body, healing her to mint condition, prompting her to smile at Young, grateful for what he's done. Of course, the pupa had been slapped squarely across the face during the whole ordeal, but he figured she hadn't meant it. It was just an instinctive reaction, probably not the weirdest consequence of all this. And in the end, taking one slap was a small price to pay to help his friend. Meanwhile, the elder who we thought was dead had somehow gone back to their clan and reported about the demise of their queen. And of course this news spread like wildfire through the spirit beast gate, throwing the entire place into chaos. Disciples rushed around in a frenzy, their movements frantic and directionless, until one woman stepped forward. Her voice cut through the noise as she boldly proclaimed herself the new queen. Meanwhile, the two decided to descend the mountain and head straight back to the spirit beast sect. Luckily, the people they encountered along the way were kind enough to point them in the right direction, so they didn't end up wandering aimlessly. But as they walked, Chenmo couldn't help but marvel at Pupa's healing ability. Not only had it restored her wounds, but even her torn clothes looked as good as new. When she brought it up, Pupa casually explained that it wasn't just healing. It was thanks to a skill he'd combined with it. Apparently, it had something to do with a weaving technique he'd picked up after swallowing weeds he'd found on the roadside. And while Chenmo found that explanation as odd as it was impressive, she decided it was better not to ask too many questions. Before long, they reached the bustling spirit beast gate. The place was alive with activity, people darting about with their arms full of gifts, all for what seemed to be an important event. The air practically buzzed with anticipation, and while the pair didn't know exactly what was happening, it wasn't hard to piece it together. The queen's succession ceremony was clearly in full swing, but curiosity outweighed caution, and so Chenmo and the tiny pupa cautiously approached the gate. Just as they were about to step inside, a guard with a scowl that could cut through steel blocked their path, as he demanded they present a gift for the new queen. The pupa, unimpressed and clearly annoyed, puffed up his tiny form and declared that the real queen was standing right in front of him. The guard's face darkened immediately, and in a flash, his spear was leveled, the sharp tip inches from their faces. They couldn't recognize the former queen's face, meaning they are just new recruits. But before things could escalate further, an elder arrived. He demanded an explanation, and the guard wasted no time accusing Chenmo of impersonating the queen. But the elder's reaction was nothing like the guard's. His eyes widened, and in an instant he dropped to his knees, bowing deeply in respect. And just like that, the guards scrambled to follow suit, their weapons clattering to the ground as they knelt in submission. The elder leaned in close, his voice low and urgent. He revealed that there was a plot to seize the throne, orchestrated by a rival faction within the clan. Half the clan had already aligned with these conspirators, and they were using the succession ceremony to cement their power. The elder insisted he was loyal and urged them to follow him to safety. With no other choice, they trailed behind as he led them deeper into the forest. But as the trees grew thicker and the air heavier, something felt off. The path twisted unnaturally, the surroundings unfamiliar, until even the forest itself seemed to whisper that something wasn't right. And then it happened. The elder's respectful demeanor melted away. He snapped his fingers, and from the shadows, a black-footed crimson fox leapt out, its glowing eyes locked on Chenmo and the tiny pupa. The black-footed crimson fox unleashed a searing fireball, but Chenmo moved faster than the flame, dodging with quick reflexes. And just as she was about to catch her breath, 3 other beasts emerged from the shadows, their ambush perfectly timed. But the duo was ready. They fused without hesitation and met the beasts halfway, quickly taking down all 3. But fight had barely started. The Crimson Fox seized the opportunity for a sneak attack, launching a fireball straight at them. But Chenmo just sidestepped at the last second and sent that shit back to its sender, killing the fox with it. and since the entire skirmish unfolded in the blink of an eye, it left the elder frozen in shock. But even then he wasn't impressed. To him, the tiny Pupa, as the queen's spirit creature, was nothing more than a weakling, and their clan had no use for such a feeble beast. After all, the current empress commanded a far more powerful creature, one that put the former queen's companion to shame. With that in mind, he had no intention of letting the former queen reclaim the throne. And so he bit into his finger without a word, summoning a glowing blood-red circle of energy above Chenmo and the Pupa. Crimson lightning crackled and struck the earth with deafening force, the coercive energy radiating so intensely that it tore Chenmo and the Pupa apart. The tiny creature hit the ground hard, knocked out cold by the impact. And though the elder's expression flickered with something like regret since the current queen is much ruthless than her, he didn't waver, as he believed the spirit Beastgate needed a queen who could rule with power. And most of the clan mirrored this belief. And so a group of armed disciples emerged from the forest, their eyes full of deadly intent. Cornered and outnumbered, Chenmo had no time to think of an escape. The disciples charged like an enraged stampede, their roars shaking the ground, forcing Chenmo's survival instincts into overdrive. So, without thinking, she grabbed the big-ass Pupa by its tail and swung it like a bat, unleashing such precision and force that it turned into a weapon of pure chaos. The disciples were sent flying with just brute force, but if that ain't enough, she decided to slam her foot into the ground with a power stomp, unleashing an AoE skill so massive that everyone charging at her was either dead or knocked unconscious. Meanwhile, the elder stood there, stunned into silence. He couldn't wrap up where the hell she managed to get such power, even though her beast was sealed. And as the dust finally settled, the crimson energy above them began to fade. Meanwhile, the tiny Pupa finally woke up, only to realize he was dangling upside down, his head spinning and throbbing in pain, which annoyed him. So he asked Chenmo why that was, but she just avoided his gaze, clearly dodging the real reason why his head had a few bumps. Instead, she quickly redirected the conversation, casually pointing out that they'd fallen straight into the enemy's trap, which was strange, considering he already knew that. But before he could put it all together, the elder made his move. With a dramatic flair, he summoned the sacred Emperor Lion, a creature so massive and terrifying that it made tiny Pupa's jaw drop. It wasn't just big, it was towering, winged, and decked out with jaws that could crush diamonds and claws sharper than dragon talons, all gifted by the new queen. And with it, the disciples believed they already won. And it was understandable. Even the tiny Pupa felt the pressure and didn't waste time. He activated his armor fusion, merging onto Chenmo's arm, and together they braced for the fight of their lives. The lion came at them with lightning-fast speed, its claws slicing through the air like deadly blades. But tiny Pupa's energy barrier held strong. The clash sent shockwaves rippling through the ground, shaking everything around them, while nearby trees splintered and onlookers scrambled for safety. And even though the chaos was overwhelming, Chenmo stayed sharp. With quick reflexes, she spun and grabbed the lion's claws mid-swipe, using its momentum to hurl it several meters away. But the elder wasn't about to give up so easily. Seeing that brute force wasn't working, he ordered the lion to unleash its secret weapon. And with that, a blinding burst of energy erupted from the lion's jaws, surging toward them like a tidal wave of destruction. Chenmo gritted her teeth and poured every ounce of strength into deflecting it. But the elder's smug grin made it clear this wasn't just any normal attack. The energy strike was specifically designed to knock them unconscious. Although it didn't work as effectively as the elder had hoped, it was enough to give the lion the opening it needed. The beast closed in and landed a devastating blow, sending Chenmo hurling through the forest. And the attack was so strong that she crashed through countless trees before finally coming to a stop. And unfortunately, the lion wasn't finished, as it began charging up another energy blast, this time aiming to end things for good. But what the lion didn't expect was that Chenmo and the Pupa had already adapted to its attacks. As soon as the lion unleashed its blast, they used their shield to negate it and quickly regained their composure, to dodge its follow-up with ease, while simultaneously jumping to a tree branch. And this spot was critical. It gave them the vantage they needed to execute their plan. As they knew that fighting the lion head-on was pointless, they had to sever its connection to its summoner. To do that, they needed to trick the elder into believing they were defeated, and the tree branch provided the perfect setup. As the lion unleashed another energy blast, they dodged it by a hair's breadth, making it look like the attack had obliterated them, and the elder fell for it completely. So he lets his guard down, which was the opening Chenmo needed. So, without hesitation, they appeared from the shadows, and before the elder could react, they struck him hard, slamming him into the ground and knocking him out cold in an instant. And this strategy proved to be extremely effective. With the elder out of commission, the lion had sustained significant damage and was now nothing more than a rabid beast. Its attacks became predictable, allowing Chenmo to easily read its patterns to dodge and counter. Jumping high into the air and landing squarely on its back, and without missing a beat she unleashed a flurry of punches to its face, forcing the beast into a wild retreat. It roared in pain, thrashing through the forest as it tried to shake her off. But tiny Pupa noticed something. The lion was heading straight for a dead end, and he quickly let Chenmo know. And Chenmo didn't waste a second. She jumped off its back just as the lion smashed headfirst into the rocky wall. Disoriented but still dangerous, it turned to fire one last energy blast, but this time, Chenmo effortlessly dodged it and readied her own special move, pouring all her energy on tiny Pupa, whose body began to glow like a miniature sun. And with one final decisive punch, they delivered a blow so powerful it ended the battle in an instant. As the dust settled, the elder started to stir, his body battered and shaking as he crawled toward the crash. And when he saw the Emperor Lion, its mighty form reduced to a broken shell, he froze. The realization hit him like a brick wall. He had lost, and there was no point in resisting anymore. And so, trembling and defeated, he fell to his knees, accepting his fate. But before Chenmo could even consider granting the elder a shred of mercy, he used the last of his strength to deliver an urgent plea. Through labored breaths, he stressed that the guild's survival depended on the coronation of a new queen. And while he accepted his fate without regret, knowing he had fallen by Chenmo's hand, he begged her to leave the Spirit Beast Gate and never return. His words carried a weight that pressed heavily on the air. Despite all that had transpired, something in the elder's tone stirred a trace of sympathy in her. What burdens had he carried all this time? What secrets had remained locked within him? But tiny Pupa got no time for all that. This shit ain't Naruto, and so he lets go of his fusion form, and approached the elder and beat the living shit out of him for even attempting to do that shit. Meanwhile, in the grand hall of the Spirit Beast Gate, the white-haired woman dripped in deep purple made her way toward the throne. Her every step radiated confidence, and her regal demeanor commanded attention. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause as she ascended to claim her place as the new queen. Chinchewer, as she called herself, let a smirk play across her lips. This was the moment she had schemed for. Her collaboration with the Tamers Alliance was truly worth it. But not everyone in the crowd seemed convinced. Whispers snaked through the gathered disciples, murmurs of treachery and betrayal tainting the air. Some claimed the rightful queen had been overthrown by foul means, and while a few dared to voice their suspicions, they were quickly silenced by sharp warnings and stern glares. Chinchewer, sensing the unrest brewing among the crowd, acted swiftly to crush dissent before it could take root. With a snap of her fingers, a group of battered women was dragged into the hall, their bodies marked with signs of punishment and their limbs shackled with heavy chains. The sight chilled the room, and the crowd quickly grasped the cost of standing against the new queen. At the forefront of the gathering stood Tan Chao Xiao, the esteemed elder of law and order. But even her high rank couldn't protect her from the new queen's fury. But with all eyes now on her, Xiao took the chance to speak to the crowd, urging them to rise against this treachery. As the rightful queen was still alive, which meant Chinchewer had no right to the throne. But before anyone could even process what Xiao had said, the new queen stormed over and slapped her across the face, shutting her up instantly. Then she turned to the prison guard and started tearing into him, yelling about how unbearably soft he'd been with Xiao. This was exactly why Xiao still had the nerve to question her. And the guard, clearly panicking, tried to defend himself, reminding her that Xiao was still the elder of law and order. But before he could finish, a chilling gust swept through the room, and in the blink of an eye, guard's head hit the floor with a sickening thud. And while the room fell silent, the queen sneered down at Xiao, her expression dripping with malice. Her cruel grin widened as she grabbed the heavy chain binding her battered body, and without a hint of restraint, she began lashing her. And every blow landed with brutal force, echoing through the hall as onlookers watched in horror, too afraid to intervene. The queen seemed to revel in the violence, her satisfaction growing with each lash, as though she was drawing power from her victim's suffering. And after what felt like an eternity, the queen suddenly stopped, her tone shifting to something eerily calm. She told Xiao she had one chance to save herself, denounce the former queen and swear unwavering loyalty to her. And if she did, her life would be spared. And Xiao's subordinates, distraught at the sight of their leader's battered body, begged her to accept the offer. But Xiao, true to her sharp-witted and unyielding nature, refused. And with a faint smirk crossing her bruised face, She made it clear that she would not bend. This only fueled the new queen's rage, and her eyes burned with fury as the air around her seemed to crackle with raw energy, and with power surging through her, she raised the chain once more, clearly intending to end it all with a devastating blow. Meanwhile, Xiao just closed her eyes and braced herself to meet her fate with dignity. But just as the chain descended, a deafening sound like thunder shattered the suffocating tension in the hall. The chain was deflected mid-swing, and the air shifted as Chenmo and tiny Pupa burst into the room, and their sudden appearance left the crowd stunned while hope flickered in Tan Xiaoxiao's eyes. Despite her injuries, a sense of relief washed over her as she saw Chenmo standing before her, and tiny Pupa, clearly confused by the scene, asked Chenmo if she knew the injured woman. And as memories rushed back, Chenmo explained that Xiao Xiao was one of her loyal followers, maybe overly devoted, but even so, Qin Chuer had no right to harm her. For the first time, the queen's face twisted in shock and confusion when she saw Chenmo and tiny Pupa. She froze for a second since she thought the great elder had already dealt with them, prompting Qinyang to reveal what happens to guy like him that fuck around, immediately surprising everyone. And while this unfolded, Xiao Xiao kept up her shameless display of adoration, her loyalty practically dripping from her every move without a shred of hesitation. And all the while, the spectators stood at a safe distance, watching the drama unfold, murmuring amongst themselves but never taking their eyes off the scene. And the queen noticed this was getting out of hand, and people were getting suspicious of her sudden coronation, and so she decided to strike. But just as she readied herself, 3 grotesque figures emerged from the shadows behind her, their voices dripping with confidence as they assured her that they had everything under control. These were the infamous 3 brothers, bearing the title of Supreme Elder in the Spirit Beast Gate, and their reputation as 4th-ranked beast tamers was enough to send a chill through the crowd. And of course, tiny Pupa, ever curious, couldn't resist asking what these ranks even meant. And Tan Xiaoxiao, never missing a chance to show off, thoroughly explained it to Qin Yang. She went on about how beast tamers were ranked from 1 to 9, and each rank was divided into 9 stages. The higher the rank, the stronger the spirit creatures they could summon and the more terrifying their abilities became. And Chenmo was an 8-rank beastmaster, but she was ambushed and her beast was sacrificed in the process. Not only that, she was fooled to make a contract with a tiny Pupa like him. She felt so sorry that she started shaking, which quickly offended Qin Yang, but even before he could retaliate, the Supreme Elders didn't waste any time. They summoned their spirit creatures with a chilling display of power. A terrifying horse with a glare sharp enough to cut steel, a buck with antlers so massive they looked like deadly weapons, and a 2-headed serpent hissing with venomous intent. And before anyone could process what was happening, the elders ordered their creatures to attack. The assault came fast, catching everyone off guard, but Chenmo and tiny Pupa weren't the kind to back down. And with unwavering resolve, and so they quickly fused together for a 3v1 match. The buck charged first, its massive antlers aimed at Chenmo, and she just took the hit head-on. At first she held her ground, but then she started coughing up blood. That's when she realized the serpent had trapped her in a venomous fog, and while she struggled to breathe, the horse sent a flurry of razor-sharp blades flying from its mane, all heading straight for her. Tiny Pupa shouted a warning, but Chenmo was already immobilized by the venomous fog, unable to defend herself. And just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Xiao Xiao, battered but determined, threw herself forward. She used her own body as a shield, intercepting the deadly attack head-on. And the projectile tore into her already battered body, and she crumpled to the ground in agony. And while her thoughts spun through cherished memories of her time with Chenmo, she managed one final glance at her queen before everything went dark. And just like that, she collapsed lifelessly at their feet. Chenmo and tiny Pupa stood frozen, their minds struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Meanwhile, the Supreme Elders and their lackeys were watching, sneering like it was all some grand joke. And Horseface over here was first to break the silence, mocking Xiao Xiao's sacrifice as nothing more than the pathetic flailing of a fool. And his brother chimed in, waving her off as if what she had done didn't matter. These 3 idiots couldn't resist piling on, taunting and laughing, each insult twisting like a knife in Chenmo's chest, and her fury began to boil over. And as that rage bubbled to the surface, she grabbed the buck's antlers as hard as she could, lifted it clean off the ground, and slammed that motherfucker down so hard it left the 3 completely stunned. But they weren't about to let her have her way, so they ordered the serpent to attack while her hands were still busy. But she just launched the buck at them with so much force it killed the 2 beasts in an instant. Even tiny Pupa couldn't believe how strong she was. But Horseface, who always loved to mix arrogance with recklessness, wasn't about to be outdone. And so, he commanded his monstrous horse to attack, and its mane shifted, transforming into hundreds of sharp projectiles that homed in on Chenmo like deadly missiles. But she was faster than that. Grabbing Xiao Xiao's body, she moved with precision, dodging the storm of razor-sharp attacks and barely missing the deadly blows as they rained down. Meanwhile, tiny Pupa was frantically consulting the system, desperate for some good news. The system reported that the digestion of the Emperor Lion was 75% complete, meaning it still needed more time. But Horseface wasn't about to wait around, unleashing a relentless spray of attacks. Thankfully, Chenmo was quick and skillful enough to dodge every strike, buying just enough time for another notification to pop up. Finally, the digestion was complete. And with it came something new, the sacred Emperor Lion Roaring Fist. And as the power surged through tiny Pupa, it was clear this was no ordinary ability. And as they braced themselves, the duo unleashed their new technique, and a wave of energy unlike anything before erupted from their combined strength, tearing through the hall. The attack obliterated the monstrous horse, reducing it to ash, and its deadly mane scattered like dust in the aftermath. Meanwhile, Horseface was finally starting to grasp how bad things had gotten. He realized the skill they had just unleashed was the Elder's Emperor Lion's power, and this left him both confused and scared, because how had Chenmo and tiny Pupa managed to pull that off? Meanwhile, the Elder, who was tied up, couldn't decide if he was more horrified or impressed, as he remembered tiny Pupa devouring his spirit creature, and he put two and two together and made a conclusion that put shivers running through him. This tiny thing was clearly more dangerous than it looked. He overly underestimated the former queen. But then the room's attention snapped to the wreckage because the vile queen was approaching, and her presence was impossible to ignore. And as her sneer deepened, she locked eyes on the three supreme elders, berating them without holding back. Immediately the three knew their life was on the edge, and so they quickly dropped to their knees and begged for mercy. But the queen doesn't have patience for that shit, and so with a swift motion of her deadly chains, she ended their lives without a second thought. Meanwhile, tiny Pupa with his sharp senses could feel the massive aura coming from the queen, so he warned Chenmo that things were about to get worse. And he was right, because the queen summoned her spirit creature, a giant ape that appeared out of nowhere, towering 3 stories high. Its size was insane, but what made it even scarier was that it was an ancient rank 5 beast, something most people wouldn't even get to see in their lives. But instead of freaking out, a few of the elders were actually celebrating, since with a beast like this, their sect was sure to rise again and maybe even reach a whole new level. And the queen was also feeling real confident with her beast, and so she figured Chenmo would give up by now. She even offered to spare her if she licked her feet. But Chenmo wasn't having it and just zoomed in ready to attack. The queen had no choice but to send the ape after her. The giant beast swung hard, but Chenmo dodged and climbed up its arm, trying to land their new Lion's Emperor punch. The punch hit, but it didn't do squat. The ape barely even noticed before swatting them like bugs, slamming them straight into the ground. But they got that durability going on, so they managed to stand back up. But just as they did, the ape's massive fist was already coming right at them. They barely dodged in time and realized quick. They couldn't take this thing head on. They had to fight smart, so they decided to ignore the ape completely and go straight for its summoner, just like what they did with the Great Elder. But unfortunately, that trick wasn't going to work twice. The vile queen smirked as she revealed another beast in her arsenal. A massive metamorphic crab with armor so tough they couldn't even scratch it. But to their shock, this thing wasn't just a walking tank. It had hands too, as it came at them with relentless attacks. It was basically spamming. With this, they were easily overwhelmed, and so it connected, sending Chenmo flying to the air, a perfect setup for the ape to give her that combo meal. And the attack hit so hard it knocked out little Pupa too, separating the two of them. And this was bad. Without Chenmo's commands, tiny Pupa couldn't morph with her, leaving her defenses cut in half. And with the ape looming over them, this was the absolute worst time for a nap. Chen Young tried everything to wake her up, but no matter what he did, she just wouldn't stir. And the queen wasn't planning on waiting for them to recover, and so the ape raised its arm to crush them for good. But just when all hope seemed lost, time froze. In an instant, Chen Young found himself in the system dimension. At first he thought it was because he died, but it seems like this was a failsafe of the system. A one-time occurrence in case the user is close to death. Now, the system gives the host 2 choices. First one was to temporarily unlock the Kirin's ability and adaptability by 100%, which will enable him to transform into full body armor, but abandon the possibility to be independent. or an early activation that unlocks only 50% of the Kirin's power, with the choice to be independent. Even though it's clearly miles apart, the answer was simple. Since Chenmo is unconscious, he chose the one where he could be independent. Immediately, aura started to pour and forced him to evolve. And as he began to change, the world around him seemed to tremble and shimmer. His body became covered in fiery red scales and sharp gleaming claws, and the power radiating from him was intense. The ground beneath his feet quaked as he let out a resounding roar, and his transformation into a mini Kirin was both awe-inspiring and a little scary. And the vile queen could only stare, her disbelief clear on her face, but she wasn't about to give up. And so she quickly ordered her ape to unleash its ultimate move. And so it did just that, gathering energy into its massive fist and doubles down with the attack. But with the upgrade, Qin Young could see them hands, making him smile even. And so he meets the ape halfway and just whipped that ugly face away from him, sending it crashing to the ground. But he wasn't one to waste time either, so he followed up with another whip, sending him to sleep for good. But of course, the fight wasn't over. The vile queen still got that crab, and so she summoned it to attack the Kirin. And you know our boy don't got that time for any bullshit, so it was on sight, killing the crab like it was an afterthought. Now the queen realized she fucked up, but she had dug too far, there was no turning back now. So she threatens Qin Young if she kills her now, the Beast Tamer Alliance would come for him. Which intrigued Qin Young, so he decided to pry further planning to get as much information before he deals with this bitch. And it seems like she was about to start singing. But unfortunately, this shady organization doesn't need loose lips like her. And so an invisible force gripped her heart, killing her on the spot. Which surprised Qin Young. But it seems like there was nothing he could do. The vile queen was really dead for good. Meanwhile, the crowd was in disbelief, and the others started whispering about this Beast Tamer Alliance, a group infamous for wreaking havoc anywhere under the pretext of liberating Spirit Beast. So it seems like this matter is not simple as it looks. Meanwhile, far away on a distant mountain, a white-haired figure lounged around. It seems like he is the one responsible for the death of the vile queen, one of the 6 pillars of the beast-taming alliance, Lang Chu. Meanwhile, Chenmo slowly opened her eyes, and the first thing she noticed was the majestic Kirin standing nearby. And while she stared, her instincts told her what her mind refused to believe. It was tiny Pupa in his transformed state. Not long after, Tan Xiaoxiao woke up too, feeling disoriented and covered in something slimy. But even though it was gross, she realized with relief that all her pain and injuries were completely gone. And as Chenmo sat up, still trying to pull herself together, the audacity of these mother-freaking disciples dropped to their knees to welcome their queen back as if they didn't try to kill her earlier. But Xiao Xiao was just happy that everyone accepted her queen back to the throne. But just when it seemed like everything was fine, a scream that could chill anyone to the bone echoed from outside the hall, shattering the moment. Immediately they all rushed to the entrance, only to be greeted by a scene straight out of a nightmare. Disciples were lying motionless everywhere, and as if that wasn't bad enough, a swirling portal suddenly appeared in front of them, and out of it stepped a shadowy figure. Qin Young didn't even hesitate. He dodged the attack that came flying his way like a bolt of lightning, and when the figure fully revealed himself, it turned out to be the guy earlier. So it seems like these shadowy organization had no intention of giving them a moment's rest, let alone the chance to grow stronger. And worse, their power wasn't something to underestimate. Even with only one member present, the figure standing before them already outclassed everyone else. To make matters worse, all 6 members of the pillars were rumored to be just as formidable, cementing their reputation as a genuine threat. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Qin Young wasted no time. He demanded answers from Chu Young, who surprisingly obliged, confident that they were as good as dead anyway. Chu revealed that the vile queen had struck a deal with their leader, promising to bring down the sect. But not only had she failed, she had also exposed their organization's existence. However, this blunder wasn't too concerning, as he was here to do the cleanup work, and make sure to let them meet the vile queen soon enough. With this, it was clear there would be no avoiding the fight, and so Qiyong gently set Chenmo down on the ground and stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Chu. He knew things were about to get serious, and so, with no time to waste, he gathered his energy and unleashed a massive beam of destruction straight from his mouth, a power he'd gained from devouring the Emperor Lion. The blast shot toward Chu, lighting up the battlefield like a fireworks show. But when the dust cleared, Chu was gone. Then, without warning, a portal opened up right above tiny Pupa, catching him completely off guard. And before he could even react, the Shadow Wolf sprang out of the portal and slammed into him, sending him crashing into the dirt. Tiny Pupa quickly realized this wasn't some ordinary beast. The Shadow Wolf's teleporting and vanishing tricks made it a nightmare to deal with. And with claws sharp enough to cut through steel, it pinned Tiny Pupa down, leaving him struggling to break free. But Tiny Pupa wasn't about to give up. Spotting his chance, he puffed up his throat, ready to unleash the biggest lion's roar he could muster, hoping to take the wolf out in one concentrated strike. And it was indeed so powerful and fast that it looked like the wolf disintegrated into thin air on the spot. The sheer force of it even cleared the sky, leaving no doubt about its power. So it was safe to say they'd won this battle, but that was just wishful thinking, as the Shadow Wolf just reappeared from the side. Stick him to the ground head first. And while he got his ass handed to him, All White over here started talking smack, which quickly pissed our dude off. So he stood up and threatened the guy. But instead of getting serious, Mr. White just started applauding like what shit villains do, and order his beast to beat him some more. The wolf blitzed through the rubble, but he dodged with. Now he was thinking about plans, but White over here just flicked his finger, and the wolf quickly turns and got his tail, and completely dog on him, smacking left and right. But this was Qin Yang's plan all along, as he now was able to get a hold of the wolf, thinking it couldn't get away this time. So he used his lion's roar one more time. But that shit clearly did not work, as another portal appeared, and not only one, but multiple of it. This was a clone formation skill, which overwhelms the opponent by blitzing through the portal, making it seem like there was a whole army of Shadow Wolf coming from all sides. Not long after, the attack created a vortex of darkness that surrounded Qin Yang completely. And while this was happening, Chenmo, who had been watching from a distance, was completely freaked out, and she tried to rush in to save Tiny Pupa. But Xiao Xiao grabbed her arm and warned her to stop, saying they didn't stand a chance against the Shadow Wolf. Meanwhile, inside the vortex, the Shadow Wolf was relentless, striking over and over until Qin Yang lost his grip and collapsed to the ground. And just when things seemed hopeless, the system flashed a warning message to him, letting him know that his mana and health were critically low and his transformation would only last 1 more minute. And since he is Chenmo's spirit beast, she could feel it too. So even though Xiao Xiao tried to hold her back, Chenmo broke free and ran straight for the vortex, desperate to help her man. But before she could get close, the Shadow Wolf struck her with a powerful blow that sent her flying, and she crashed hard onto the ground. But her bold move wasn't for nothing, because Chu got distracted, and that gave our boy just enough time to act. With that tiny window of opportunity, he stomped down hard on the Shadow Wolf, breaking open a small gap in the vortex, and without wasting a second, he used the last of his strength to escape, and Chu thought this was just a waste of time. But as soon as he noticed Qin Yang had landed on the ape, he realized what he was about to do. And so he quickly commanded his shadow to charge, but his order came too late. Qin Yang had already fully devoured the ape and started merging with it. From it, he had evolved into a more formidable beast, the primordial dragon form, which made Chu frantic. So he commanded his wolf to end this once and for all, but it only got its teeth knocked out, completely turning the tides, which boosted Qin Yang's confidence. And so he started dissing White Hair, but he wasn't fond of getting disrespected like that. So he also showed to Qin Yang that he isn't the only who can evolve in this situation. He commanded his Shadow Wolf to initiate moon form. Immediately, its aura turned red. Its power seemed to double, but you could hear the screams of the wolf. Its force evolution was indeed hurting it, but White didn't care, as he just wanted this to get over with. With its newfound power, the werewolf closed the gap between them so quickly it seemed as if it had teleported. And with immense force, it sends Qin Yang hurtling across the battlefield until he crashed straight into a distant mountain, and he was about to stand up, but the wolf was already on that, choking him down only to send him flying to the air for a quick setup for his charging ability. But Qin Yang got his own energy attack, so he started blasting that shit too. But this ain't no Dragon Ball. So there was no energy clash, and it just exploded mid-air, in which the wolf made use of it to get in a clean hit, only to get countered, knocking it back a few meters away. And obviously, it should have used the shadow teleportation ability by now to close the gap, but it didn't. With this, Qin Yang realized that the werewolf seems to have sacrificed its teleportation for raw strength and speed, and so he decided to run them hands and see for themselves who was the stronger one. And as the fight raged on, Tan Xiaoxiao realized that Chu was standing alone, completely absorbed in the spectacle. And with an idea sparking in her mind, she summoned her spirit creature, the green grass fairy, which emerged gracefully from the earth like a shadow come to life. And with just a flick of its wand, the fairy conjured thick vines that snaked their way out of the ground, wrapping around Chu and locking him in place. And without missing a beat, the fairy crafted a massive vine sword for Xiao Xiao, who seized the chance to strike. She charged at the immobilized man and sliced him in half with precision, but her moment of victory didn't last, and sure enough, it was just a shadow clone. The real Chu stepped out of the shadows and countered with a shadow strike that shot straight for her. But the greengrass fairy intercepted it, shielding its master without hesitation. And with no time to waste, Xiao Xiao ordered the fairy to unleash its ultimate ability. Thick, unyielding vines erupted from every corner of the grand hall, entangling Chu in a trap so tight it left him utterly helpless. And as the vines completely consumed the grand hall, Xiao Xiao shouted for Chenmo to eliminate Chu's spirit creature while she stayed behind to hold him off. Meanwhile, the fight between Qin Yang and the werewolf had hit its peak. The two clashed with such unrelenting ferocity that their attacks tore through the battlefield like a raging storm. But then, in a sudden twist, our boy vanished without a trace, leaving the werewolf disoriented and scrambling to find him. And before the werewolf could react, Qin Yang had already charged his ki and unleashed a powerful blast straight at it. The force sent the wolf flying a few meters away, giving Qin Yang a brief advantage. Just for Qin Yang to reappear with the most telegraphed attack I have ever seen, making it laughably easy for the wolf to dodge that shit, and severely get punished instead, completely sending him a few meters back. And for a moment he just lay there, struggling to catch his breath. That's when he noticed something alarming. His strength was fading. Turning to the system for answers, he realized, much to his frustration, that the further he was from his master, the weaker he became. Which frustrated Qin Yang, but thankfully, Chenmo was already making her way toward him, and it seems like they could talk to each other through telepathy, making it easier for them to form a plan. But unfortunately, the wolf could easily smell bad bitches, and so as soon as she got close, it quickly appeared to kill her. Thankfully, Qin Yang had regained his power and was able to catch on, barely blocking the attack, and sends the wolf back with his tail. But it seems like the wolf's attack had made contact. The damage was severe, and the pain overwhelmed him, forcing him to collapse to the ground, his body unable to hold out any longer. And this time there was no second chance for Qin Yang. His body grew colder with each passing moment, the blood loss taking its toll. It was clear he wouldn't last much longer. Thankfully, Chenmo's system reminded her of an ability tied to her transmigration, a soul contract ability. She didn't fully understand how it worked, but with no time to waste, she decided gambling on it was better than watching Qin Yang die. The moment she activated it, a sudden, overwhelming aura burst forth. The sheer force of it obliterated the terrain around them, leaving the battlefield in ruins. This was the power of soul merging, an ability that fused their souls together, doubling their combined strength. However, it came with a severe limitation. It could only last for 30 seconds. But with the raw power surging through them now, 30 seconds was all they needed. Meanwhile, the wolf sensed immense danger, so it instinctively unleashed a powerful energy blast. But Qin Yang casually redirected it like it was nothing, prompting the wolf to use its clones instead, hoping to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. But this, too, proved to be ineffective. Qin Yang could easily pick out the real one, and so he wasted no time and grabbed the wolf down to the ground with a force that shook the terrain. And with the wolf pinned down, he made sure to end this once and for all, so he charged the fattest power move he could create, and released that nuke point blank. And it was indeed powerful, as it disintegrated the wolf entirely, leaving behind nothing but a massive crater. It was a little overkill, honestly. If he hadn't gone that far, he might have been able to devour the wolf and gain even more power. But what was done was done. The battle was over, and with it, the soul contract ended. Qin Yang returned to his tiny form, exhausted but aware that the fight wasn't truly finished. Not with Chu still alive. Without a moment to spare, he and Chenmo sprinted toward where Chu was. Meanwhile, inside the massive plant tower, the battle between Xiao Xiao and Chu raged on. But it was clear the fight was taking its toll on her. She had already burned through most of her mana reserves, while Chu seemed as fresh as ever. His shadow skills were relentless and incredibly difficult to counter, leaving her no choice but to push herself to the limit. Every ounce of her strength was poured into countering his attacks, but the effort was quickly depleting what little energy she had left. Desperate to end things quickly, Xiao Xiao went all out, summoning a flurry of vines to strike him down. But no matter how many she threw his way, Chu effortlessly sliced through them, escaping every attack without a scratch. Before long, she was forced onto the defensive. Even that, however, proved futile as his seemingly endless shadows overwhelmed her, leaving her exhausted and battered on the ground. Just as Chu prepared to finish her off, a sudden shift in his expression revealed something was wrong. His connection to his wolf had been completely severed, a clear sign that it had been killed. The realization threw him off guard. However, He didn't believe for a second that Qin Yang could have been responsible. Instead, he concluded it must have been another powerful force. With that thought in mind, he decided to abandon Xiao Xiao, leaving her beaten but alive, and headed straight toward the location where his wolf had fallen. But that was the biggest mistake he could ever make, 'cause Xiao Xiao started getting flashbacks. And you know what happens when that happens? A total power-up straight out from the deepest part of their ass. But thankfully, this wasn't one of those cases. Instead, Xiao Xiao recalled the queen's words, reminding her that she had a sharp talent for observation. The queen had once told her she could turn that ability into her greatest strength, allowing her to win any fight. The memory reignited her determination, and she forced herself to stand and stop the dude from leaving, which he thought she was just courting death, and so he quickly grants that wish by attacking her. But with her observation skills now fully engaged, Xiao Xiao noticed something crucial about his shadow-based attacks. They could only be conjured from existing shadows. If she could eliminate those, she could neutralize his greatest advantage. So she summoned her grass spirit and created a glowing flower bed beneath them. The light from the domain grew so intense that it erased every shadow in sight. And just as she suspected, Chu could no longer summon his shadow beasts. With his defenses compromised, Xiao Xiao seized the opportunity to land a decisive, devastating blow, finally bringing him down and claiming victory. But as she caught her breath, she realized Chu wasn't dead, just incredibly angry. He couldn't fathom how a lower realm cultivator had managed to defeat him. Fearing he might flee, Xiao Xiao mustered the last ounce of her strength and struck again, intending to finish him off for good. Unfortunately, what she hadn't anticipated was just how monstrous the 6 pillars truly were. To her dismay, the Chu she had been fighting was revealed to be nothing more than a clone, but she was far too exhausted to react, her body giving out as she collapsed onto the flower bed, drained of all energy. But that would be all for today, so tune in next time for more.